This meeting
Okay,
is being recorded.
we're now live on YouTube, and I have added the resume recording.
Can the jail be on mute, Your Honor?
Yeah, the background is killing me. For the record, today is July 27th, 2022. This is the 8:30 calendar for felony preliminary hearings. My name is Brad Gardner. I will be presiding over these hearings today. This matter, State of Georgia versus Justin Lane. Mr. Lane is charged in warrant number 2022 CW 51176 with conspiracy to commit a crime. He's also charged in warrant number 2022 CW 51177 with conspiracy to commit a crime. He's charged in warrant number 2022 CW 51178 with committing the offense of false imprisonment. And he's also charged in warrant number 2022 CW 51179 with committing the offense, and it says party to the commission of a crime. Ms. Freeman.
Yes.
As I read the charges, I'm kind of unclear of the difference between the party to the commission of a crime and the 2 counts of conspiracy to commit a crime. So if you would, as you're going through your presentation, please help me to understand that. Mr. Lane, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, if you want me to, I can read on the record, because as I read the warrants, they're more specific, is other than what's just listed on the calendar. Like, so for the first warrant, 51176, it says conspire to commit battery and false imprisonment.
Okay.
And then 51177 says conspire to commit battery.
Okay.
Okay, then we have the false imprisonment. The 51179, the warrant says gather with multiple inmates, plan / organize and carried out a physical assault of Wilkerson, is charged as a misdemeanor.
The party
to a crime is charged as a misdemeanor.
Okay.
And it looks like it's a party to the crime. It says to carry out a physical assault on the victim. That's what's the latest in the warrant.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Lane is present in court. Mr. Lane is being represented by attorney Justin Hill, who is also present. The state is being represented by attorney Cheryl Freeman. Ms. Freeman, would you please swear in your witness and present your case?
Thank you, Your Honor. Investigator Wright, would you raise your right hand, please? Do you swear and affirm that the testimony about to provide in the matter of State of Georgia versus Justin Lane will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, to help you God?
Yes, ma'am.
Please tell us your name and how you're employed.
Investigator C. Wright, Clayton County Sheriff's Office.
How long have you worked with the Clayton County Sheriff's Office?
Since October of 2020.
And sir, were you assigned to investigate an inmate assault that allegedly occurred on December 31st of 2021?
Yes, ma'am.
Were you working with the Sheriff's Office at that time?
Yes, ma'am.
You were assigned this case on January 4th of 2022?
Yes, ma'am.
Please tell us what you did when you started this investigation, sir.
I started this investigation by speaking with the victim, inmate Wilkerson, and also watching video footage of this incident.
Where did the alleged incident occur?
Inside the Clayton County Jail. If you allow me to refer to my report, I'll tell you exactly what cell number.
If you would need that to refresh your recollection, go ahead.
It happened inside of housing unit 7, cell 7214.
Did it happen inside of a cell or outside of the cell?
The assault occurred inside the cell.
The video surveillance that you indicated that you were able to review, did that cover what happened inside of the cell or outside of the cell?
The video footage that I reviewed showed what happened outside. Excuse me, just showed the movement going in and out of the cell. It didn't actually capture the incident itself.
Okay, so first you stated you talked to the victim, inmate Wilkerson. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
What did Mr. Wilkerson tell you that happened?
Said he was laying down in his room on the evening of December 31st, and that another inmate came down to his room and told him that a few other inmates wanted to speak to him inside cell 7214. Inmate Wilkerson stated that he proceeded to go up to the cell. Once he entered the cell, there were multiple inmates lined up along the wall of the cell, inside the cell, as well as sitting on the bunk.
Your Honor, if I may, I'd like to object to his testimony as hearsay.
And Judge, you're muted, but my response is hearsay is allowed during the preliminary hearings.
I'm sorry, I said overruled. I'm sorry.
Oh, okay, I didn't, okay, you were muted.
Yes,
Thank you, Judge.
yes.
Investigator Wright, you can continue.
Inmate Wilkerson advised me once he was inside the cell, an inmate uttered a few words to him, something into the nature of him not checking in as it relates to being in a gang or a part of a gang. At that point, inmate Wilkerson stated that he didn't want to fight. He said one inmate punched him in the head area, in the face, and that he told the inmate he didn't want to fight. The inmate hit him again. At that point, he fell to the ground, and multiple inmates began to assault him.
Was inmate Wilkerson able to give you any names of the inmates?
So I provided a photo lineup of all the inmates that were inside that housing unit. And inmate Wilkerson pointed out the inmates that he saw that were inside that cell that assaulted him. One of the inmates that he did point out was the defendant, Lane.
Investigator Wright, that you indicated that when inmate Wilkerson when he went to the cell, there were these other inmates were lined up on the wall or in the cell?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. From your investigation, and you said something about checking in, what does that mean?
According to inmate Wilkerson, he stated that let me refer to my report just to see exactly what he said. I recall putting in my report, just need to refresh my memory.
If you need to review that to refresh your recollection, please review it and then just testify without reading from the report.
And Investigator Wright, the question was about what does checking in mean? Do you know that or do you not know that?
So I do know it, and I recall putting that in my report. I just want to confirm what I put in my report, sir.
Well, can you just please respond to the question? What does checking in mean?
Well, based off of what inmate Wilkerson told me, it was more related to a gang. It was a gang term. meaning checking in. So I don't specifically know myself. I can just recall what inmate Wilkerson told me. It was something related to being in a gang.
So do you need to read your report to understand what the term checking in means?
No, I do not. I just want to recall what specifically I wrote in my report.
But if it's not in your report, how is that going to refresh your recollection?
I did wrote, Your Honor. We can. I recall writing what he said to me in my
Which
report.
is checking in. And that's what you just testified to. And I'm just saying, Investigator Wright, don't make this more complicated than it needs to be. Either you know what the term checking in means, you don't know what term checking in means, you wrote in your report, and then you can refer to your report to then testify as to what the term checking in means. It's not complicated.
And Judge, I think Investigator Wright has given that answer. I can try to move him along. Investigator Wright, from your investigation, were you able to determine any gang affiliations between the victim and the defendants in this case?
So the victim advised me and confirmed that he was a part of the blood gang. He did mention to me that there were several inmates that were inside the cell that were part of a member of a gang.
Okay. Were you able to interview any of the inmates who you saw in the video surveillance, or who Mr. Wilkerson stated was there?
I attempted to interview multiple inmates, which the majority of them declined to speak to me.
The video surveillance that you were able to review, please tell us what you saw from that video.
I saw initially inmate go to the victim Wilkerson's cell. At some point, the victim came out. He sat in the day room on the bench. It appears one of the inmates were talking to him. The victim proceeded to go up to cell 7214 and walked inside the cell at that point. The cell was closed behind him, and it appeared that's when the assault began. Also, during watching the video footage, I observed multiple inmates, to include the defendant, go in and out the cell during the time of the assault. Yeah.
And specifically, if you can, since this is a hearing regarding Justin Lane, tell us what you recall you saw from the video surveillance, what inmate with Justin Lane, what he was doing.
I specifically seen the defendant walk in and out of the cell during the time of the assault.
And I believe you stated
as it relates to what
I'm sorry?
So as it relates to what he actually did while inside the cell, that wasn't captured on video.
And just to make sure, was Justin Lane one of the individuals that the victim was able to identify?
Yes.
Did Mr. Wilkerson sustain any injuries?
Yes, he sustained multiple injuries to his face and to his body.
Did Mr. Wilkerson have to be transported to the medical department?
Yes, he was transported to the medical infirmary.
Investigator Wright, from your video surveillance, and I know this case involved multiple defendants, if you can tell us what you were able to see that other defendants were doing during this time.
You said that other defendants?
With other defendants who were charged also.
Objection, Your Honor, as to the relevance, because this preliminary hearing is about Mr. Lane. It doesn't really matter what the other defendants were doing.
Judge, the reason is because several of the charges are conspiracy as well as part to a crime, and just trying to show what all the investigator was able to see on the video to show that this defendant certainly participated or aided and abetted in what actually happened to the victim, Mr. Wilkerson.
I agree. I'm going to overrule the objection.
Thank you. So Investigator Wright, tell us exactly what all you were able to see from the video surveillance.
Yes. So there were multiple inmates going in and out the cell. During the time of the assault, there was also inmates looking inside the cell during the assault.
When you say looking in, what does that mean? Are you saying looking around other places in the jail, looking at someone specifically?
I'm sorry, looking through the cell window. Every cell has a window in the door, and there were multiple inmates looking through the cell window.
During this time, were there corrections officers on duty around this housing unit?
Yes, there were correction officers on duty during that day.
Did any of those corrections officers come by the cell when this was happening?
Not at the time, not during the assault, no ma'am.
Was this a recreational time where the inmates were able to move freely?
The inmates, I believe, were on rotation. However, I do not recall which level was on rotation.
Just so we understand how this housing unit is, are the inmates, are they allowed to move around freely?
During their rotational period, yes, ma'am.
What exactly is a rotational period?
A rotational period happens during the day whenever the top level is let out for free time. It's pretty much whenever the inmates are allowed to have their free time, make their phone calls, use the kiosk.
Did Justin Lane provide a statement to you at all?
No, ma'am, not to my knowledge.
Okay. Did Mr. Wilkerson indicate whether or not he was able to leave out of that cell?
He tried to, but he stated the inmates didn't allow him to.
Was Mr. Wilkerson able to give you any details about what Mr. Lane did to him?
I believe he did. However, I don't recall exactly what he said to me, and I don't believe I notated it in my report. He just stated that multiple inmates, to include Mr. Lane, struck him multiple times.
Ms. Freeman.
Yes, sir.
Let me try to understand that response. Your question was, what did Mr. Lane do?
Right. I asked if Mr. Wilkerson, the victim, was able to give any details about what Mr. Lane did to him.
And I heard the response was that he didn't or couldn't, but that Mr. Lane was one of the persons.
But he said he did. I think he said he did, but he couldn't recall what specifically he said. Or Investigator Wright, correct me if I'm wrong. What was your response to my question?
Correct. I don't recall exactly what he said specifically, but he did state that inmate Lane struck him multiple times along with other inmates.
Your Honor, the first time he indicated that he believes that Mr. Wilkerson said that he did something, but he doesn't recall because he didn't include it in his report. Now he's changing his testimony.
I don't believe he changed his testimony. He says he doesn't believe that he noted it in his report.
Right. I don't believe he changed it, but I do believe what I heard was that the allegation is that Mr. Wilkerson said that Mr. Lane did something to him as a part of physical contact, which he's not charged with battery, but he didn't note it in his report.
Right. He says he doesn't believe he noted in his report.
Okay.
Investigator Wright, and I know you said you don't believe that you noted in your report. Did you have an opportunity to review your report before the hearing this morning?
Yes, ma'am.
And you reviewed the entire report?
Some briefly went over the report, yes, ma'am.
Did this incident happen in Clayton County?
Yes, ma'am.
On the video surveillance, were you able to see when, I guess, the assault ended?
Yes, ma'am. I was able to see the victim exit the cell, which I believe the assault ended at that time.
If you can recall from that video surveillance, could you tell when Justin Lane left that area?
So I have to refer to my report, but I do have the times that he was seen entering and exiting the cell.
If you can recall, and this is without looking at your report, do you recall whether
you're broken up, you're frozen.
Let's give it a second. We'll pause for a second, allow Ms. Freeman to log back in.
Judge, can you hear me? It's Mary.
Yes, I'm here.
She's trying to log back in.
And we'll give her time.
Judge, I apologize. I'm not sure what happened.
It's fine.
All of a sudden got kicked out. And my internet just, it like went out.
I'm gonna blame Mr. Hill.
Sorry, Judge.
Okay, would you re-ask, if you remember, re-ask your last question?
Right. I was asking Investigator Wright, do you recall from watching that video surveillance if inmate Wilkerson left before the defendant Lane left?
I don't recall.
When the victim, Mr. Wilkerson, left, were the majority of the inmates still in that area, or had some of them left?
So some of the inmates had left, and some were still inside the cell.
Okay. Would it refresh your recollection to review the times that you indicated with when the inmates entered and left that you put in your report?
Yes, it would.
Judge, I would ask that Investigator Wright be allowed to refresh his recollection by reviewing his report regarding the times when inmate Lane left and the victim, Mr. Wilkerson.
That's fine.
Have you refreshed your recollection, Investigator Wright?
Yes, I have.
Okay. So based on what you reviewed, what time did inmate Lane leave?
He exited the cell at 22:04, but then he re-entered again. He re-entered the cell at 22:05. He exited the cell again at 22:06 and re-entered at 2207.
Was during those times when the defendant Lane entered and re-entered or exited, and when he came back, was the victim, Mr. Wilkerson, still there in the cell?
Yes, ma'am.
And when did the victim, Mr. Wilkerson, finally leave the cell?
2213.
Were photos taken of Mr. Wilkerson's injuries?
Yes, ma'am.
That's all I have. Thank you.
Mr. Hill?
Yes, Ron, if I could just have 1 second just to gather myself. Okay. Good morning, Officer Wright. My name is Attorney Justin Hill, and I'm representing Mr. Justin Lane. I have a couple questions for you. So you mentioned that the incident occurred inside of cell 7214, correct?
Yes, sir.
What inmates resided in that cell?
I'd have to look at what units were assigned to that cell.
Okay, I'll just ask like this. Did Mr. Lane reside in that cell?
As in, was he in there during the incident?
No, like was he assigned, was he housed in that particular cell?
I'll have to look at my documents for recollection.
Okay. You don't recall off the top of your head?
I do not, sir.
Okay. Okay, I'll keep going. Later, you mentioned this idea of, you mentioned that an inmate uttered some words to Mr. Wilkerson that came to his cell and uttered some words to him. Was this Mr. Lane who uttered these words to him?
No, I don't believe so.
Okay. You said that when Mr. Wilkerson got to cell 7214, that an inmate punched him. Was this Mr. Lane?
The inmate that initially hit him?
Yes.
No.
Okay. Let's see. When you were referencing the term checking in, you said that this was a gang term and that an inmate went to him and mentioned that they were checking in with Mr. Wilkerson. Was this Mr. Lane who was checking in with Mr. Wilkerson?
Hold on, Investigator Wright. My understanding of the testimony of Mr. Hill was that term was that Mr. Wilkerson was not checking in.
Okay, I'm sorry. Well, let me rephrase that question. Was this Mr. Lane that confronted Mr. Wilkerson about him not checking in?
No.
Okay. You mentioned that there was some sort of gang affiliation between the victim and the defendants. To your knowledge, does Mr. Lane have any gang affiliation?
Not to my knowledge, but well, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, finish your answer, Mr. Wright.
To my knowledge, no, but Mr. Wilkerson told me that that the guys that were involved were members of gang.
Okay, but he didn't specifically identify Mr. Lane as being a gang member.
So he specifically told me that the guys that were involved in this assault were gang members. That's what he told me.
Okay. Again, and this is a yes or no question. Did he specifically identify Mr. Lane as one of those gang members?
He identified Mr. Lane as somebody, one of the inmates that assaulted him. And he stated again that the individuals, the inmates that were involved were gang members.
I understand that, but you're not answering my question. It was a yes or no question.
I think Investigator Wright has answered the question to the best of his knowledge.
And I accept the answer, just so you know, Mr. Hill, as being no to
Okay.
the response to your question.
Okay. Thank you, Your Honor. Let's see. So earlier you mentioned that you said that Mr. Lane left cell 7214 at 2204, and then he re-entered again at 2205. Do you recall what time he initially entered the cell?
I'll have to look at my report to recollect. If I notated it in my report, then yes, I'll be able to answer that question. The inmates, multiple inmates, were going in and out of the cell before the assault, during assault, and I notated the times that each inmate that was pointed out during the assault of Mr. Wilkerson, what time they entered and exited the cell. A lot of inmates were already in there and actually didn't come out until well after the fact.
Okay, but again, Mr. Lane, he exited the cell. If strike that. If I'm from your previous testimony on direct, it sounds like you testified that Mr. Lane was inside of the cell for about a total of 2 minutes. Is that correct?
No. If you're adding it all up together, I don't recall it being 2 minutes. I noted that in my report, I noted that he entered, he exited, entered, exited, and then re-entered the cell.
Okay. He was not in there throughout the duration of this incident.
The extended period of the time of the incident, I would say not the entire time, because he did
Thank you.
enter and then exit again and re-enter. Okay.
Did you see any indication of Mr. Lane preventing Mr. Wilkerson from leaving the cell?
From the video camera, no.
Okay. Did Mr. Wilkerson provide any indication that Mr. Lane prevented him from leaving the cell?
Not to my knowledge specifically.
Okay. Let's see. Did you see Mr. Lane associating with any of the other inmates that were involved in this incident prior to the incident occurring?
I don't recall.
Okay.
Excuse me.
I have no further questions, Your Honor.
Okay, Ms. Freeman, any follow-up?
No additional questions, Judge. The state rests.
Okay. Investigator Wright, you can be released. You can certainly stay on if that's your preference, but you are no longer compelled to be here. Mr. Hill, do you have any witnesses that you intend to call?
No, Your Honor.
Okay. I'm going to assume that Ms. Freeman is going to waive opening.
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay, so Mr. Hill, let me hear your argument.
Yes, in this case, the evidence against Mr. Lane is, if there's any, it is extremely slim. There's no evidence that, and the officer did not testify to any evidence that Mr. Lane conspired at all to commit any sort of assault or battery against Mr. Wilkerson. Again, as you know, I asked Investigator Wright if Mr. Lane in any way prevented Mr. Wilkerson from leaving the cell, and he said no. And also Mr. Wilkerson did not identify Mr. Lane as preventing him, as someone who prevented him from leaving the cell. Mr. Lane was in the cell. That's not a crime. Like I said, Mr. Wilkerson said that he did not see anything that Mr. Wilkerson did at all. I'm sorry, he didn't see anything that Mr. Lane did while he was in that cell. He was not in the cell for the duration of the assault. He did not see Mr. Wilkerson associate with any of the people who, any of the other people who committed this assault. He himself mentioned that the assault was gang related, and that Mr. Wilkerson identified the assault as gang related, and there's no indication that Mr. Lane is gang affiliated at all. There were a few inmates who have been identified as, coming up to Mr. Wilkerson and leading him into the cell, and also initiating the entire incident. And Mr. Lane was not a part of any of that. So I would ask that, Your Honor, dismiss all of these charges.
Thank you, Mr. Hill. Ms. Freeman?
Judge, we're asking that all the charges be bound over. We heard from Investigator Wright that when he interviewed victim Mr. Wilkerson, he specifically identified Justin Lane as being part of the group of inmates who hit him, who struck him. When asked if he was able to leave, he said that the inmates wouldn't let him leave the cell. We heard testimony from Investigator Wright that Justin Lane, he entered the cell, he exited the cell, he re-entered, he exited, he re-entered again. Various inmates, some of them were standing outside the cell, some of them stood inside the cell, some of them were looking inside of the cell. But Justin Lane, just as all of the other inmates who participated, they all participated in this assault of inmate Wilkerson, as well as the false imprisonment. So we are asking that, based on the testimony provided by Investigator Wright, that you bind all of these charges over to Superior Court.
Okay, I am going to, there are going to be charges I'm going to dismiss and charges that are going to stay. The charge ending in warrant number 76, conspiracy to commit crime, false imprisonment, that's going to be dismissed. Warrant ending in 77, conspiracy to commit crime or battery, that's going to be dismissed. I'm going to bind over the charge of false imprisonment, which charge ended in warrant number 78. I'm going to bind that over to Superior Court of Clayton County. And the warrant ending in 79, party to the commission of a crime, I'm going to bind that over. So there'll be 2 charges dismissed and 2 charges bound over.
Judge, I'm sorry. So warrant number 76, is that bound over or dismissed?
76 is going to be dismissed. 76 and 77 are going to be dismissed. 78 and 79 are going to be bound over to the Superior Court of Clayton County.
All right, thank you, Judge. And may Investigator Wright be excused?
Yes, Investigator
All
Wright.
right, thank you, Investigator Wright.
Can be excused. Mr. Lane can go back. Mr. Hill, if that's your only case here today, you can be excused, sir.
Yes, Your Honor. Thank you. You have a great day.
You too.
And Judge, I know Attorney Rhonda Hill indicated that Charles Hill was going to be hearing, so we'll go ahead and get that officer ready.
Okay, thank you.
All right, and I want to check, Attorney Hill, is William still a hearing? You're muted.
Yes, Williams is still here.
Okay, well, Judge, I'll get also on Williams because I think Charles Hill will take longer than Williams.
Okay, that's fine.
All right.
Thank you.
Judge, we're still on YouTube.